It was a cold night in October 1938. The silence of the Brahmani River was suddenly broken by the sound of marching boots. The British-backed police, armed with rifles, moved in, searching for rebels. But they never expected that the biggest resistance would come from a 12-year-old boy. This is the untold story of Baji Rout, the youngest martyr of India's freedom struggle. A boy who defied an empire and sacrificed his life for justice. To understand Baji Rout's courage, we must first know where he came from. He was born in 1917 in the small village of Nilakantapur, Odisha. His family belonged to the humble Kiwat community, who made a living by ferrying people across the Brahmani River. His father was a hard-working boatman, and his mother was a loving but firm woman who taught Baji the values of honesty, bravery, and sacrifice. They did not have much wealth, but they had dignity. However, under the rule of the king of Denkanal, life was becoming harder for poor villagers. Baji grew up listening to stories of injustice and oppression. He often saw his father and other villagers being forced to pay unfair taxes to the king. Even the money they earned was snatched away by the British-backed police. Despite these hardships, Baji Rout was a bright and curious child. He attended a small village school where he learned about the great freedom fighters like Mahatma Gandhi and Bhagwan Birsa Munda. Their stories of resistance ignited a fire in his young heart. But beyond books, his greatest lessons came from the river. The Brahmani River was not just water for him. It was his home, his playground, and his source of livelihood. He learned to row a boat from his father and soon became an expert at ferrying people across the waters.
October 11th, 1938, a night that would change history forever. For weeks, the people of Denkanal had been protesting against the cruel rule of their king, who was backed by the British. The freedom fighters of the Prajamandal movement were leading the charge. Among them were young men filled with dreams of an independent India. Sanjeev Rout, Harihar Panda, and Fagasahu. That evening, these revolutionaries, along with dozens of villagers, had gathered in the town of Bhuban for a protest. But what was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration turned into a massacre when the British-backed king sent his police to crush the movement. The police opened fire on the crowd, killing several innocent villagers. Screams filled the air, and people ran for their lives. Those who could escape rushed toward the Brahmani River, hoping to find refuge on the other side. Among them were a few wounded activists, bleeding and desperate, trying to reach safety. And standing by the river was Baji Rout, the 12-year-old boatman who had already chosen his side in this war against injustice. As the activists reached the riverbank, Baji quickly helped them into his boat, using his small hands to push them away from the shore. He knew the police were coming, but he also knew that his mission was greater than his fear. Just as he turned around, he saw them. A group of British-backed policemen stormed onto the riverbank, their boots kicking up dust, their rifles gleaming under the moonlight. The officer in charge stepped forward, his eyes filled with arrogance and cruelty. The British officer asked Baji Rout, "Boy, where's the boat? Where are the rebels?" Baji Rout stood firm, fists clenched, his heart pounding, but he refused to speak. The officer's patience was running out. He took a step closer, towering over the little boy. Attempting to intimidate Baji, he told, "Do you know what happens to those who defy the king? We have burnt down villages. We have shot men in broad daylight. And you're just a child. You cannot stop us." But Baji Rout was not afraid. He had seen enough suffering. He knew that giving in meant letting them hunt down his people. The officer grabbed Baji's arm, twisting it hard. By threatening voice, the officer told, "This is your last chance. Take us across or die right here." But even in pain, Baji did not waver. He lifted his head and, with unshaken resolve, replied, "I will never take you across. I will never help oppressors." The officer's face turned red with fury. How dare a mere child challenge the might of the king's police? The policeman raised his rifle and, without warning, slammed it against Baji's head. The impact was so strong that he fell to the ground, blood streaming down his forehead. The villagers watching from a distance gasped in horror. Some begged the police to spare him, but mercy was not an option that night. As Baji lay on the ground, struggling to lift himself up, the officer gave the final order, "Shoot him." Before anyone could react, a gunshot echoed in the night. A bullet pierced Baji Rout's small head. A second shot hit his chest. His tiny body collapsed near the very river he had sworn to protect. The Brahmani River, which had once carried his laughter and dreams, now carried his blood, his sacrifice, his legacy. At just 12 years old, Baji Rout had become India's youngest martyr. The news of Baji Rout's sacrifice spread like wildfire. Thousands of people joined the fight against the British-backed king. His body was taken to Cuttack, where leaders like Harikrishna Mahatab and Sarangadhar Das paid their last respects. His funeral became a massive protest against British rule. Even today, his name is written in history, but how many of us remember his sacrifice? He was not just a child. He was a warrior, a rebel, and a martyr. Do we still honor the sacrifice of Baji Rout? Or have we forgotten the price of our freedom?